Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really pivotal period of American history, the antebellum years, roughly 1820 to 1860. This was a time when society felt, like it was on the brink of something huge.
Right.
A period just bursting with these profound reform impulses. People didn't just think about change. They were actively trying to fundamentally reshape everything.
Yeah, driven by this almost idealistic belief in perfecting society, perfecting individuals.
It's an era often overlooked, but its influence, well, it still echoes today.
And our mission for you today is really to unpack the sheer diversity of movements that bloomed during this era. You've got these powerful spiritual awakenings,
Right.
radical communal experiments trying to build, heaven on earth, and of course the huge fight against slavery and the beginnings of the struggle for women's rights.
Okay.
All these efforts, though, they look really different, but they sort of shared a common thread. They aim to, quote, perfect the national destiny and redeem the souls of individual Americans. And we've pulled together a really fascinating collection of historical excerpts that I think immerse you in the energy of this time.
So as we navigate these powerful currents of change, we're going to help you understand what truly ignited these movements. What were they actually hoping to achieve? Maybe most compellingly, what surprising connections and even profound contradictions pop up when you look closely at how Americans tried to forge this better world.
Yeah, there are definitely some contradictions.
Get ready for some unexpected turns and those satisfying, moments that make history come alive. Let's unpack this.
Okay.
So our journey into this age of reform, it really begins with a foundational shift. This major religious revival known as the Second Great Awakening. Think of it as a kind of spiritual earthquake that dramatically reshaped how Americans viewed their own faith and their destiny.
Right. Its core message was centered on a highly emotional religious experience, personal salvation.
Which was a huge departure from the older Calvinist idea of predestination, wasn't it? The idea that God had already chosen who's saved.
Totally. This new revival swung the pendulum right over to individual agency. You could choose salvation.
And here's the powerful aha. This wasn't just about personal faith. It was like a profound shift in how Americans saw themselves.
Moving from predestined fate to actively shaping your own destiny.
That must have resonated deeply with the democratic ideals of the time, the whole Jacksonian celebration of the individual.
It really did. And this fervor, it wasn't just in fancy churches. It exploded across the frontier, especially places like Kentucky and Tennessee.
Through those big outdoor camp meetings.
Exactly. Huge camp meetings, itinerant ministers. This burst of enthusiasm, it offered comfort and stability while people were grappling with really rapid population growth, heading west, this new participatory democracy.
Wow. So the impact was pretty big.
Immense. Church membership actually doubled between 1800 and 1835. Yeah. And this explosion of faith, it wasn't just individual. It led to the formation of these massive organizations like the American Bible Society, the American Sunday School Union.
Okay, so they weren't just spreading scripture.
No, they were foundational to building a kind of national sense of shared morality, even literacy in some ways. It shows how spiritual movements could become these powerful engines for social organization.
Okay, this idea of individual salvation sounds revolutionary, but it existed right alongside the brutal reality of slavery. How did this religious revival impact that? Or even justify it? What was the friction there?
Well, that's where it gets really complex and frankly disturbing. Initially, a lot of slaveholders actually feared enslaved people converting to Christianity.
Why?
There was this lingering belief maybe that Christians couldn't be enslaved, and also a worry that Christian principles might inspire resistance. But by the early 1800s, a sort of legal workaround emerged. And then this chilling adaptation. Some slaveholders started to believe that if enslaved people learned the right kind of Christianity, meaning white Christianity, it could somehow lead to more obedience.
Oh, wow.
And, conveniently ease their own consciences. It's a really stark example of how deeply entrenched institutions can twist even potentially liberating ideas.
That is a chilling shift. But surely enslaved people themselves found different meanings in this awakening. Were there, forms of resistance or autonomy that grew out of it?
Absolutely. And this is crucial. This era also saw the powerful creation of distinct African-American forms of worship and, very significantly, independent Black Protestant churches.
Okay.
A prime example is the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church, founded by Richard Allen back in the 1790s. This was just vital for African Americans to express their faith and find spiritual autonomy separate from the often hypocritical white-dominated churches.
Right. Okay, so moving north, there was this Presbyterian minister, Charles Grandison Finney. He really embodied this new religious zeal, didn't he?
He did. Originally from Western New York, he found huge success in places like Rochester, a real boom town thanks to the Erie Canal.
And his message connected with a certain group.
Yeah, it deeply resonated with the emerging middle class. You know, the merchants, the lawyers, the factory owners, a direct result of the Industrial Revolution. They saw themselves as agents shaping their own destiny.
Makes sense.
And this whole region of Western New York actually got the nickname the Burned Over District because the flames of religious fervor. And from this spiritual ferment, another profound intellectual movement emerged also in the Northeast, starting in the 1820s. Transcendentalism.
Transcendentalism. Okay, break that down.
Well, to transcend in this context meant to go beyond the ordinary sensory world, right? To connect with a deeper reality, achieve profound personal insights. They believed all people could grasp truths beyond just, like, rational experience.
And they weren't big fans of mainstream culture.
Not at all. They were quite critical, reacting against what Alexis de Tocqueville called the tyranny of the majority in Jacksonian America. Their emphasis on individualism was heavily influenced by European romanticism, privileging emotion, intuition over cold reason.
And the leading figure here was Ralph Waldo Emerson, right?
Undoubtedly. He started as a Unitarian minister in Boston, but left the clergy after his wife died. He traveled to Europe, met Romanticist thinkers, came back, and started lecturing on these revolutionary ideas.
His essay, Nature.
Pivotal. 1836. He argued you could find true spirituality in nature, not just in a church or the, bustling industrial city.
And self-reliance.
1841. Famously urging readers to think for themselves and reject the mass conformity and mediocrity he saw in that famous line, "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist."
Powerful stuff.
Emerson's ideas really captured this profound tension, perfectly echoing Tocqueville's worries about that tyranny of the majority, the idea that a powerful group could just steamroll individual thought.
Were there other key figures?
Oh, yeah. Henry David Thoreau, huge emphasis on nature, wrote Civil Disobedience, reacting to the Mexican-American War and slavery, and of course, Walden, or Life in the Woods.
Right, Walden Pond.
Then there's Margaret Fuller, a powerful advocate for women's equality, editor of The Dial, their journal, and Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, Song of Myself, celebrating that subjective individual experience, but also suggesting this transcendent unity among everyone.
But it's important to remember, not everyone was swept up in this, were they?
No, absolutely not. You had critics like Herman Melville famously in Moby Dick and Edgar Allan Poe, who openly mocked what he called the so-called poetry of the so-called transcendentalists.
Okay.
It shows that ongoing friction, that tension between radical individualism and the pull of conformity in American life. It wasn't universally accepted, highlighting that debate within the nation itself. So these economic transformations sweeping the U.S. after 1815 factories, market economies, they profoundly altered how people lived and worked.
Yeah, a huge shift.
And this shift, combined with the spiritual and intellectual awakenings we just talked about, inspired some Americans to experiment with entirely new ways of living.
Trying to build something better.
Exactly. Their hope was to create more equal, harmonious, even perfect societies. This movement really hit its peak in the 1840s, with dozens of these experimental communities popping up.
Okay, so the spiritual earthquake reshaped individual lives, but then that desire for a better self expands to wanting a better society, right? A perfect community.
Precisely. That's where some Americans took these ideals next, founding these fascinating communal living experiments.
And many were religious utopian societies, often influenced by the Second Great Awakening.
Yes, a lot of them were. You had pietistic societies focused on intense personal devotion, communal living like the Ephrata cloister in Pennsylvania way back in the 1730s, and the Rappites, starting in Pennsylvania around 1805.
And they shared everything. Celibacy.
Generally, yeah. Communal goods, often celibacy. Then, of course, you have the Shakers.
Yes, the Shakers. They originated in England.
Right, as an outgrowth of Quakerism. Their leader, Anne Lee, Mother Anne, taught that God was both male and female, and she represented the female side.
And their communities were pretty radical for the time.
Oh, very. Equality for men and women, no private property, amazing self-sufficiency, famous for their excellent workmanship.
And the No sex and the dancing.
Correct. They prohibited sexual intercourse, saw it as a lesser spiritual life, and were renowned for these ecstatic, rapturous dances during worship.
Interesting contrast. Strict control, but also this ecstatic expression.
At their peak in the 1830s, they had about 6,000 members across various communities.
Okay, another one was the Oneida community. John Humphrey Noyes.
Yes, Noyes. He developed this belief in perfectionism, the idea that it's possible for individuals to become perfect, completely free of sin.
And he applied this to relationships in a controversial way.
Extremely. He advocated complex marriage, basically a communal marriage where perfected individuals could have sexual intercourse without it being sinful, along with something called male continence to prevent unwanted pregnancies and focus on spiritual growth.
Wow. That must have caused a stir.
It did. He scandalized his hometown in Vermont, moved his followers to Oneida, New York. The community actually lasted until 1881, eventually becoming a silverware company, believe it or not.
No way. Okay.
But the most successful religious utopian community of the antebellum years was undoubtedly the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right. Joseph Smith.
Their story began with Joseph Smith, who claimed he received golden plates from an angel, Moroni, then translated and published them as the Book of Mormon in 1830.
And he saw himself as a prophet.
Yes, aiming to recapture what he saw as the purity of the early Christian church. His vision emphasized a kind of reinvigorated patriarchy, hoping to create a new Jerusalem right there in America.
But the Mormons faced intense opposition almost immediately, didn't they?
Right from the start. From New York, they were forced to move to Ohio, then faced financial collapse after the Panic of 1837, driven out of Missouri.
Which led them to Nauvoo, Illinois.
And Nauvoo, by the 1840s, became the largest utopian community in the U.S., 30,000 people. They set up virtual autonomy, even had the largest armed force in the state.
And Smith introduced polygamy there. Ran for president.
They received revelations about polygamy, announced a presidential bid in 1844, all of which really fueled public apprehension and opposition.
Which ended tragically.
It did. This growing power, their distinct practices, it generated huge opposition. Smith was arrested for treason, and while in jail, he was murdered by an anti-Mormon mob.
So after his death.
Brigham Young took over leadership, guiding the church members on that epic journey across the plains to establish a permanent home in what's now Salt Lake City, Utah. A remarkable story of resilience.
But not all these utopian societies were religious, right? Some were secular.
Correct. Many were rooted in intellectual ideas, romanticism, individualism. Take Brook Farm near Boston.
Founded by a transcendentalist, George Ripley.
Yes, in the 1840s. It got support from Boston intellectuals like Emerson and Thoreau, though they didn't live there full time. Their vision was unique. Combine manual labor with intellectual pursuits, run a school, publish a journal, The Harbinger.
Nathaniel Hawthorne was connected too.
He was for a time. He even fictionalized his experiences there. But ultimately, Brook Farm struggled financially and ended after a big fire in 1847.
Okay, what about Robert Owen?
Owen was a British industrialist, really concerned about worker conditions. He envisioned cooperative societies based purely on human reason, no religion involved.
New Harmony.
Right. He bought the Rapite community's property in Indiana in 1825, renamed it New Harmony. Sadly, it dissolved pretty quickly, infighting bad decisions. But his ideas about cooperation did inspire other Owenite communities.
And the Fourierists.
Inspired by Charles Fourier, a French philosopher. Proposed communal phalanxes, labor was capital, unpleasant jobs paid more. About 28 Fourierist communities popped up in the U.S., but they mostly fizzled out by the late 1850s. Hard to sustain these grand experiments.
Okay, so beyond these big communal experiments, the antebellum era saw this surging concern for, well, human health and morality. Drunkenness, especially, was seen as this massive national problem, undermining morality, Christianity, even democracy itself.
Yeah, the stats on liquor consumption back then are truly staggering, levels never seen again in U.S. history.
Wow. So that sparked the temperance movement.
It really did. It started with early societies in New England in the 1810s, often led by Protestant ministers. Initially, they advocated for more restrained, kind of genteel drinking, not outright prohibition.
But it got more serious.
Yes. By the 1820s, Lyman Beecher, a prominent Presbyterian minister, became a leading voice. His sermons urged total abstinence from hard liquor. That spurred the American Temperance Society in 1826, a big step towards organized reform.
And then it got even stricter, didn't it? The shift to teetotalism.
Right. By 1836, the call shifted to total abstinence from all alcohol, including beer and wine. That actually caused some disagreement within the movement.
But it revived again.
Big time in the 1840s, led by a new group, the Washington Temperance Society, formed in 1840. What was different was its leaders came from the working class, and they specifically targeted confirmed alcoholics, a real shift from the earlier middle-class focus.
And they had a different approach.
Genuinely innovative, they welcomed women and children, brilliantly reframing alcohol as this destroyer of families. They encouraged public pledges of teetotalism, and they masterfully used theater, like the super popular novel and plays based on 10 nights in a barroom, plus public events, picnics, parades, to really dramatize the plight of drinkers.
Did it work?
They saw this meteoric rise in popularity. Maybe 600,000 people took the pledge by 1844, though eventually its popularity waned, partly due to relapses. Keeping those pledges was hard.
But did this movement have real political impact? Did laws change?
Oh, yeah. States started passing temperance laws. Massachusetts passed one in 1838 restricting liquor sales. It got repealed, but it inspired local dry laws. Mississippi did something similar in 1839.
It was national.
The push was strongest in the North, though. Maine enacted the very first statewide prohibition law in 1851. Other New England states, New York, Midwestern states followed with local laws in the 1850s. A widespread desire for change, definitely. And beyond alcohol, other reformers looked at broader health improvements. Remember, this was a time with very few professional medical organizations, lots of quack doctors.
So people were looking for health advice.
Desperately. And into this steps Sylvester Graham, another Presbyterian minister. He combined temperance with vegetarianism and sexual moderation into his Science of Human Life.
What does that involve?
Advocated a regimented diet, more vegetables, fruits, grains, no alcohol, meat, or spices. Emphasized cleanliness, baths.
And the graham cracker.
And yes, he invented the graham cracker in 1829. He actually intended it as a kind of perfect food to maintain health and curb unhealthy appetites.
Huh. Amazing. Okay, speaking of the body and mind, before we move on, I'm curious about one more fascinating, if slightly odd, attempt to understand human nature back then.
Phrenology. That was huge, wasn't it? The whole mapping the cranium to specific human attributes.
It absolutely was. It came from Europe, Franz Joseph Gall, but became wildly popular in the U.S. in the 1830s and 40s.
And it wasn't just like serious science?
No, it became a form of popular entertainment too. People would get their heads read to find out their character traits, their talents, even their moral compass.
Why is it so popular? It seems strange now.
Well, yeah, it's pseudoscience now, but its popularity gives us this fascinating window into the anxieties of antebellum America.
Oh, so think about it. Society's changing rapidly. People are moving around. Old community ties are weakening. Phrenology offered a way, or seemed to offer a way, to quickly understand one another, to recognize an otherwise unknown individual.
Like a shortcut to judging character.
Kind of. And interestingly, while the overall theory was flawed, Gall's basic idea that different brain regions did have different functions was actually an important scientific advance. So it's this curious mix of scientific curiosity and social anxiety.
Okay, now we have to turn to what was arguably the most combustible issue of the entire antebellum reform era, slavery.
Definitely a most explosive.
And the profound disagreement wasn't just if it should end, but how. The ideas were all over the place, from displacing African Americans entirely, to advocating violence, to relying on moral arguments for immediate, peaceful change.
Indeed. And you first see these reforms that, well, they didn't involve integration at all. Take colonization.
The American Colonization Society.
Founded in 1816, supported by big names like Thomas Jefferson. Their core belief was that Black and white people simply could not live as equals in the U.S.
So their solution was relocation.
Yeah. Relocating free Black people to Africa. They played a major role in creating Liberia. It starkly reveals this deep-seated racial prejudice, even among some who claim to oppose slavery itself.
Then there were the direct, often violent challenges to slavery itself.
Right. The most significant being Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831, Virginia.
Inspired by the religious awakening.
Seems so by evangelical Protestantism. Turner led this major slave uprising, killing enslavers and their families.
And the backlash.
Severe. It ultimately cemented Virginia's commitment to slavery, tragically led to the deaths of maybe 200 more black people killed by white vigilantes, and slaveholders increasingly blamed Northerners for inciting rebellion.
And David Walker.
Walker was a free black man who published an appeal to the colored citizens of the world in 1829. He advocated active resistance, even violence, urging black people to fight for equality, and fiercely denounced colonization. His mysterious death months later just solidified him as the symbol of hope for free black people and terror for enslavers. So, moving to a more radical approach, you get abolitionism, seeking the immediate elimination of slavery, primarily through moral arguments.
Aiming for a multiracial society of equals.
That was the goal. Driven by the religious fervor of the era, they hoped to spark this mass awakening in public opinion to the sin of slavery. They were confident they could transform the national conscience. It wasn't just about freeing people, it was about transforming the nation's soul.
And the undisputed leader here was William Lloyd Garrison.
Garrison, from Massachusetts. He initially favored colonization, but came to see it as just a racist scheme. He founded his abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, in 1831. That very first edition famously declared, and I'm quoting, "I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice, and I will be heard."
Wow. Uncompromising is right.
And this unyielding stance, his demand for immediatism, immediate action to end slavery and ensure equal rights for black and white people, led white Virginians to blame him for stirring up rebellions like Nat Turner's.
So how did Garrison and his followers try to achieve this? Through groups like the American Anti-Slavery Society.
Exactly. Through organizations like the New England Anti-Slavery Society and the American Anti-Slavery Society, which had like 250,000 members by 1838, they rejected colonization, rejected violence.
So they focused on moral suasion.
Yes. Appealing to the public conscience, especially slaveholders, they used dramatic narratives, often from formerly enslaved people, to highlight the hoarders.
Focusing on families.
Huge focus on how slavery destroyed families, sold children away from parents. These narratives really resonated with women, too, who condemned the sexual violence against enslaved women and how it corrupted the white family unit as well.
And they used the press, petitions.
Vigorously. Sent hundreds of petitions to Congress, ensuring the debate reached readers everywhere. They really forced the issue onto the national stage like never before. Now, it's important that while Garrison rejected the U.S. political system saw it as a tool of slaveholders, other abolitionists thought, mainstream politics could work.
Like the Liberty Party.
Formed in 1840, nominated James G. Birney for president. Birney himself was a former enslaver who'd freed his own enslaved people. He kind of epitomized their goals, but the party remained pretty fringe, showing the uphill battle they faced politically.
And the backlash against abolitionists, even in the North, was fierce, wasn't it?
Oh, incredibly fierce. Driven by deep-seated racism, also economic anxiety, fear of job competition if slavery ended.
Garrison himself was attacked.
Nearly killed in 1835. A Boston anti-abolitionist mob dragged him through the streets. There were attempts to outlaw abolitionist literature, the infamous gag rule in Congress forbidding even considering abolitionist petitions.
Elijah Lovejoy, Pennsylvania Hall.
The murder of abolitionist printer Elijah Lovejoy in Illinois, the burning of Pennsylvania Hall in Philadelphia by protesters, all showing just how deep and violent the resistance was, even outside the South. And amidst all this, escaped enslaved people became these absolutely pivotal voices, none more so than Frederick Douglass.
Right. Born enslaved in Maryland, escaped in 1838.
His commanding presence, his powerful speaking skills just captivated audiences as he lectured about slavery. Then in 1845, he published his narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave written by himself.
An incredible book.
Powerful autobiography. But it identified the white people who brutalized him, which actually forced him to flee the U.S. to avoid being captured or even murdered.
But he came back.
Thankfully, yes. British abolitionist friends bought his freedom, allowing him to return. He then started publishing his own abolitionist newspaper, the North Star, in Rochester, New York.
And he kept speaking out.
Tirelessly. Through the 1840s, the 1850s, working to end slavery by sharing his story. And he explicitly detailed the moral complications, the destruction of families, black and white, caused by slavery. He was particularly pointed about the horrific sexual violence committed by white slaveholders against enslaved women, and sometimes against their own children born from that violence. His perspective just exposed the utter rot at the core of the institution. And it's absolutely crucial to understand that women were incredibly active in all these antebellum reforms, often amplifying their traditional roles as moral guardians of the home and society.
Right.
But their deep involvement in anti-slavery efforts specifically served as this really critical springboard for advocating against gender inequality.
How so?
They started to realize that they too were, in a sense, kind of held in shackles in a society completely dominated by men.
And their legal rights were incredibly limited back then.
Extremely. Women had very little control over property legal authority. Until state laws slowly started to change in the 1840s, husbands often fully controlled their wives' earnings, inheritance rights.
Even the new laws didn't grant full equality.
No, far from it. It provided some additional power, but it highlighted the severe legal and economic constraints women faced. And here's a really striking contradiction. Even many progressive abolitionist men fighting against the injustice of slavery clung tightly to traditional gender roles. White and black women, and free black men too, were often barred from leadership positions in big organizations like the American Anti-Slavery Society.
So that exclusion pushed them.
It led women to form their own separate abolitionist societies. They started to see their own struggle for rights as running parallel to the fight against slavery.
The Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina, they're a prime example of this intersection, right?
Perfect example. They came from a prominent Southern slaveholding family, moved north, converted to Quakerism. Then, in 1837, they did something pretty scandalous.
The lecture tour.
Yes. They embarked on this groundbreaking public lecture tour, speaking about immediate abolition to promiscuous assemblies, audiences of both men and women.
Which was basically unheard of.
Practically. It brought the whole question of women's proper sphere right to the forefront of public debate. Women speaking publicly on political matters, that challenged everything. And this direct link between abolition and the rise of feminism, it was stated so eloquently by Lydia Maria Child, who is both an abolitionist and a feminist. She observed, and I'm quoting her, "The comparison between women and the colored race is striking. Both have been kept in subjection by physical force."
That's powerful.
And you had other pivotal figures emerging too, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, Susan B. Anthony, all pushing for greater equality for women.
Which all sort of culminates in the landmark Seneca Falls Convention in 1848.
The big one. Organized by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. This gathering produced the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments.
Famously declaring all men and women are created equal.
Exactly. And outlining this whole history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman. It was a deliberate, powerful echo of the Declaration of Independence, but crucially expanding its ideals to include women. Although it's also interesting to see how some Northern female reformers, like Catherine Beecher, Lyman Beecher's daughter, actually found a way to argue for women's vital role within traditional gender roles.
How did that work?
She championed this idea of Republican motherhood, basically arguing that women, with their inherent morality and nurturing qualities, were uniquely qualified as educators of children. Their job was to restore the nation's moral compass, especially in a time of what some saw as democratic excess.
So gaining influence without directly challenging the traditional sphere.
Kind of, yeah. It was a way to claim power and influence within the accepted framework.
And finally, we absolutely cannot overlook the truly powerful voice of Sojourner Truth.
Absolutely not.
Born into slavery as Isabella Baumfree, gained her freedom in 1826 and just devoted her life to both abolition and women's rights. She famously won a lawsuit to free her son, an incredible achievement for a black woman in that era.
Just remarkable. And her most famous contribution is arguably her Ain't I a Woman speech, delivered in 1851. In it, she just brilliantly challenged the prevailing notions within both movements, abolition and women's rights. She advocated fiercely for black women's rights, arguing they shouldn't have to wait for white women's suffrage.
Using those rhetorical questions.
Yeah, unforgettable questions about physical strength. I have as much muscle as any man, and can any man do more than that? And about intellectual capacity, if women have a pint and man a quart, why can't she have her little pint full?
She wove in biblical references, too, just making her points with undeniable force, reminding everyone that the fight for equality wasn't monolithic, it had layers. So, as we bring our deep dive to a close, it's just so clear the antebellum era was this true crucible of reform. driven by these incredibly powerful spiritual, intellectual, social impulses. We've seen how the Second Great Awakening and transcendentalism laid these foundational ideas about individual agency, self-reliance.
Right.
We explored that surprising variety of utopian experiments, religious, secular, trying to build better worlds, the widespread temperance movement, other health reforms try to perfect the body and mind.
Yeah, all interconnected.
And of course, we tackled that truly combustible issue of slavery, the whole spectrum of challenges to it, and how the women's rights movement really grew directly out of the fight against abolition, expanding the very definition of liberty.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that common thread running through all of them. This intense search for perfection, whether of the self, the community, or the entire nation, all happening against this backdrop of incredibly rapid change. These reforms, despite their varied successes and failures, they undeniably laid critical groundwork for future social movements. They profoundly redefined American ideals of individualism, equality, justice. The aha here is really seeing how deeply intertwined these seemingly separate movements actually were, each drawing from and influencing the others in this grand, sometimes messy experiment of American self-improvement.
And that leads us right to our final provocative thought for you. Consider how many of these antebellum ideals and tensions, that delicate balance between individual freedom and collective well-being, the ongoing fight for equality, that perpetual pursuit of a better world, how much of that continues to shape American society in our ongoing debates even today?
It really does echo.
What might that continuity tell you about the enduring impulses that drive change? Something to think about.